Good evening, everyone. So, I would like to talk to you about Sauternes and the evolving patterns in the Sauternes region, coming from noble rot to liquid gold. I'll start with a legend. The legend says that in 1847, the Marquis de Lur Saluces, an ancestor of mine, went out hunting bear in Russia. And of course, he had the wonderful idea to do that during the harvest season. The problem is that when you're not here, nothing happens. So no one harvested. And when he came back to France, they discovered that everything had rotten and that the crop was not good enough to make wine. But they still harvested, and miracle, they realized that they obtained an amazing wine. As a Lur Saluces myself, I can do whatever I want with this legend, and you cannot prove me wrong. So I say that he was out hunting in Russia with the Tsar, because who else? The tiny problem is that it's not entirely true. Now, we know that it is not true because 60 years earlier, Thomas Jefferson wrote, talking about Sauternes, that it is the best white wine of France. And he said that in 1787, so before. And we know that the wine was already sweet at the time Jefferson tasted it. So that proves, or that gives us a clue, that Sauternes was not invented in one go, it was not a miracle, but it is a long process that took place during centuries. It's a process that required vision, craftsmanship, singularity. And let's have a look at the real story of Sauternes. Let me ask you a question. What, in your opinion, is the most important element? It's very interesting what happens with the PPT. So what is the most important element in making a great wine? A lot of you will think of terroir. Good idea. Perhaps not the right one. Terroir, for those who don't know that, is this very French idea that basically the place is in the glass. It's a mix between the nature of the land, between the weather, between the landscape itself. It's a fairly vague idea that the glass tastes like where it comes from. But in fact, French historian Roger Dion said that terroir is not a given, it's a human construction. The terroir in Sauternes is quite humid. Humidity, very high humidity when you have a vineyard, can be a problem because humidity tends to favor rot, tends to favor mildew, botrytis. These are natural enemies when you want to make wine. So, Sauternes is not a terroir that was where it was obvious that we would make wine. If we go back to the 13th century, which is when we find the first traces, historic traces of vines in Sauternes, it was more mixed agriculture. So you had cows, orchards, a few vines, but everything was produced in the same place. In Bordeaux in general, and in Sauternes, the planting of vines as an extensive production happened later in the 16th century. It happened when the Dutch, with their big and efficient ships, started exporting wine to the northern countries of Europe, to the Hanseatic markets. And while transporting wine there, they discovered that wine did not travel extremely well. We had some issues. Sometimes the wine would ferment once again. And perhaps you know, but the natural destiny of grape juice is vinegar. Our job as winemakers is to try to stop the process at some point. So wine would arrive in a bad quality at the destination harbor. So the Dutch helped the Bordelais, helped the French to enhance their techniques by using sulfur, by using blending methods. And the Dutch also discovered one wonderful element to help preserve wine when it travels. They realized that, especially for white wine, the higher the sugar content, the better the taste and the state of the wine when it arrived. And you can find it in other exporting goods as well. So there was in the northern market a development of the taste of sugar because sugar helped preserve the goods. That means that the demand for sweeter white wines increased and that the buyer was prepared to pay a premium, to pay more and more for this type of wine. So that means that the demand can change the production. Because of course, when you are a French producer, a Sauternes producer, you produce your white wine, and someone arrives and says, "Oh, I'll pay a premium to have this cask." First thing you do is, yes, of course, I'll take the premium. And then, why did he want this cask specifically? Because the wine was sweeter. Ooh, interesting. Why was the wine sweeter? Because it came from that plot that was attacked by the fungus, by what we now call the noble rot. But that plot was attacked by this natural phenomenon, which transforms the fruits. Good. How can we have more? Well, this transformation happens late in the harvest season. Okay? Then, let's delay the harvest and let's do late harvest. So, we know how it happened. The way it happened is that you had landlords and you had tenants. And the landlords asked the tenants to delay the harvest. The tenants were not very happy because they would keep for themselves a part of the production and they would give a share to the landlord. So when the landlord said, "Please delay the production," the tenant would see the rot spreading through the vineyard. He was not very happy. They were not very happy about that. We know that in 1601 there is the first contract stipulating that the landlord will decide on the harvest date. It took many years for the tenants to really be unhappy about that. And in 1667, there was a lawsuit against François de Sauvage, another ancestor of mine, where the tenant accused François de Sauvage to willingly force him to let the harvest spoil or rot. François de Sauvage replied, "I do that for the quality and the reputation of my wine." In other words, he knew exactly what he was doing. They then observed and thought, well, the way the botrytis spreads, we could enhance the quality further by doing a better selection. So they realized that they could harvest fruit by fruit, cut only the part of the grape that is attacked, wait for the rest to be rotten, come back, cut, wait for the rest to be rotten, etc., etc. This is the harvest by waves, coming back several times during harvest time. This is still what we do today. We harvest, on average, between 4 to 5 times. On average, can be much less, can be much more. So we harvest between 4 to 5 times, which means that we work between 4 to 5 times more to get less quantity because the botrytis shriveled the grapes. So we work 4 to 5 times more to get 5 times less in quantity. So you understand the lawsuits and the tenants being unhappy because they were waiting for the market to be ready to accept these wines. Disruptive innovation is often met with resistance. So we learned like that we had to stop resisting nature, fighting the botrytis and the rot, and we could learn to dance with it. So we've just seen that logistics drove the taste, the logistics constraints drove the taste, which drove the market, which drove the production. But what about the reputation? Why has this Sauternes region such a high reputation? There are many problems, there are many issues. It's hard to produce, the yields are very low, it comes at a great cost, and it's more of a modern problem, but it's high in sugar content. What is quite interesting to see is that all these red flags became solutions. So let's have a look. First, it's difficult to make. We had to, I say we, but generations had to observe nature, try and understand as best as they could, and try and adapt and learn how to help the vine to give birth to this kind of wine. That was a series of observations, of failures, of precision, and this complexity transformed into craftsmanship, from negative to positive. Then there's the issue of the irregularity. The botrytis, this small natural fungus, needs very specific and peculiar weather to be happy on the vine. That means that it needs an alternance between humidity, as every fungi, and dry conditions. That means that we are not happy every year. Sometimes the botrytis comes in great quantity, we're very happy. Sometimes it comes in very tiny quantity. Sometimes it arrives too late during the harvest season, which means that success is not for every year. This irregularity became rarity, from negative to positive. And then the low yields meant we had a limited supply. That is an issue, because when you produce something, if you want to establish your produce, you need to have a great quantity to put on the market to create visibility. We could not with our production method. But this scarcity added value to the wine, from negative to positive. And then the sugar. The sugar at the time, the issue of the sugar was that it was a surprising wine. It was a wine that no one knew. It was a new type of wine. It became a different drink. And thanks to the balance we managed to get in Sauternes between sweetness, acidity, a hint of bitterness, thanks to that, it became an exceptional wine. It became a wine that was consumed by Thomas Jefferson, by George Washington, by the Grand Duke Constantine, by the Emperor Meiji in Japan himself. With this success came excesses. Excesses means, when I say excesses, I mean imitation. In the region, some, or even not in the region, some of the wines produced and labeled as Sauternes were red. Some others were dry. Some others were not coming from the region. So in 1908, the producers from the region formed one of the first wine syndicates in France. In 1936, they created one of the first wine appellations. This is because they wanted to write down a method. They wanted to define the grape varieties. They wanted to define the terroir, the geographic location where this type of wine should be called Sauternes. What I'm saying is that they were starting to take control to protect. They were not following, but creating a pattern from limitation to distinction. As a conclusion, in wine business, in Sauternes, as in a lot of other businesses, standing is not an option. We always have, and we always had, and we always will adapt. We adapted to the market, to the climate, to the technology. That's what makes my job so demanding. But that's what makes my job so exciting. You saw that Sauternes was not a miracle. Sauternes was not invented by accident. Sauternes was invented through a series of decisions, of obstinacy across generations. All these patterns, the market, the climate, the technique, the regulation, are not separate. They can all blend into one single pattern, coming from noble rot to liquid gold. I'll finish with a quote I come back to quite often from Pierre Veilleté, who is a French writer. And he said, "There are no great vineyards by destiny. There are only the stubborn acts of civilization." Thank you very much.